So today on the bench we have a Fender Blues Deluxe, and I wanted to show this one because it has some of the typical issues of these amps. And we'll go through how to quickly identify those, or some of the first things you can look for, and yeah, we'll go from there. So the customer stated that they had put in new tubes. The amp had been having issues running before. They thought, power tubes would fix it, so they replaced those. Did not fix the issue. Amp will want to cut out, I think is what they had said. But anyway, so first up, I pull the back off, and I definitely will check out these tubes. But a very common issue with these vertically mounted caps is that they will, sometimes the solder joints will break loose. And actually, solder joints in general are an issue for these amps. So if you do find a cap that's bad, you're going to have to take this board out anyway. You want to be sure and check all your control pots and everything else on the back of this board as well, but that might be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So what you can do for these caps to see if any of them are broken overtly, now sometimes they can still be broken, you wouldn't necessarily know from this test, but this can give you an indication. If you find one, then there could be others. You wiggle these caps back and forth, and if they sort of have some pressure as they wiggle, or don't want to move at all, then they're probably secure. If you get to one like this one, I don't know if you can hear that or not. I'll try and... There's almost like a clicking sound when it moves. That's because one of the solder joints is broken on this cap. So that is most likely our issue. And then the other thing, when I get in here and inspect around the tube sockets, and I'll try and get a shot of this, a closer shot, but there's cracked solder joints, and that's another very common issue with these, and that can happen on preamp tubes or on power amp tubes in these amps. So what you want to do is just go in and resolder those joints. Yeah, so one thing I will say, this is one of the Blues Deluxe, this is one of the earlier ones, so these IC caps, very rare for them to be bad, but they are getting up in years now, so you may want to replace those at some point. But in terms of them physically leaking their electrolyte out, these ones don't appear to have any of that, and a lot of the ones from this era, these really early ones, don't tend to have that issue. So anyway, it's a matter of popping this circuit board out now, this main board. Easiest way to do that is to undo all of the nuts on the controls up here for both your 1/4-inch jacks and all your control pots. And then there's a bunch of Phillips head screws in the board. We pull those out, and hopefully with moving these wires in and down and everything like that, there'll be enough room that I can pull that board down and sort of rotate it so that the shafts of the control pots will slip out past the chassis first, and then I should be able to just roll the board down. And when you're doing this, you do want to watch out, because these ribbon cables, sometimes those can be a little bit brittle. They can take a fair amount of movement, but you don't want to kink them or put a lot of stress on them. Okay, so I want to quickly demonstrate something here for you. I was working on this amp end of yesterday and got a bunch of issues sorted out, which I may or may not go over. And I went to power it up and try it out for the first time, and we got this sound. So that's with the amp on the clean channel, not the overdrive channel. And you notice how the high notes have a sort of weird thing going on with them, and low just has no guts and it wants to break up. And not a nice breakup either. Whenever I hear that type of sound, I automatically think, oh, I'm only getting 1/2 of the signal, one phase of the signal. So automatically I want to go to my phase inverter. I want to check plate voltages for pin 1 and pin 6, so that'll give you both those plates. And if you don't find something there, then you want to go on to your coupling capacitors, check those, make sure they're doing their job and blocking DC, and sort of move on down the line from there. It can also be possible in these amps, they have those protection diodes, and I think I might have covered this in another video. Those protection diodes, maybe one of them can start to leak a little bit and it's not doing its job anymore. So that can also be an issue, but you'd likely see some sort of bias issue or something like that with your tubes if that were going on, or at least that's usually what I've seen. You'll get a little bit of an anomaly there in your plate voltages. So anyway, going to check this phase inverter and we'll see what's going on. So this is pin 1, and you see we have a little over 200 volts, and then pin 6. You have like 2 volts and it drops down towards 0. So I would say, more than likely, that we have a bad plate resistor here somewhere. So we'll go back, pin 6, and we look up over here. That side does the same thing, so let's check the other side. Now the other side of that resistor we have 387, so more than likely we've got a bad plate resistor, but before I change anything I'm going to swap that phase inverter just to make sure that it's not causing a bleed down. But we know where the problem is, so it's either tube or that resistor. Okay, so I've got my test tube in there, and we'll just give that a second to warm up. And what I do for test tubes is if I have amps that come in, or one of my amps, a tube goes microphonic, but is otherwise good, I'll save those ones for use as test tubes, and I will plug them into my tester. But if they operate okay in circuit and they're just kind of noisy, a lot of times I'll save those just for this purpose, for testing. Okay, so we'll put the meter on here and flip our switch. And we have exactly the same result. So more than likely we have a bad plate resistor, and I think that one's 100K. It's not uncommon for 100K resistors to go bad in these amps. So I will replace that, and I usually replace it with a 1 watt instead of half watt. Can make things a little bit quieter, and it'll hold up a little bit better and probably last the life of the amp. So. Okay, so we're going to check our repair here. One thing you want to make sure that you do when you solder on these circuit boards, because a lot of them have been old and baking, and some of them, the traces aren't that great on them. They may want to peel up when you desolder your old components, so you want to be fairly quick about it. But if you notice any peeling at all, I always scrape back some of the masking and solder it into the ways into the trace, or create a jumper over the next component. Just to sort of make sure you got a good connection, and you want to make sure you verify that with your multimeter before you put power on it. But so I checked all that, so let's flip this thing on and take a look and see what we have. So this will be pin 1. As a reminder, we got 236, and pin 6, 241. So, good. Time to plug in a guitar and give it the real test. So that about wraps it up with this one and some common issues. But it looks like it's performing as it should, so we'll button this back up and get a build done up. See you next time.